Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession." Jesus did not answer a word. And so his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs." "Yes, Lord," she said, "but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed from that very hour. This is the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to you. Would you like to be seated, please? Is this thing working? Yes, it is. Great. I'm never sure. Well, thank you for the invitation to come to probably the furthest north I've been in the Swansea Brecon diocese, and I've been ordained for some 40 years, and most of that time has been in the diocese. It's the furthest north I've ever been. So I made sure that when I went to Morrison's the other day, I had a full tank of petrol, because I don't think there are many petrol stations on the way up. I think I counted just a handful, so I was a bit nervous. It reminds me of the story of a bishop who was en route with his wife to a confirmation service in a country church when he ran out of petrol. Fortunately, his wife was probably more observant than he was, noticed that about a mile back was a petrol station with a petrol pump. And so he hurriedly went round to the back of the car, searched in the boot to try and find a container, and all he could find was his grandson's potty. And so he grabbed hold of it. Well, any port in a storm. He grabbed hold of it, and then he walked back to the garage and filled it up with petrol, and then came back. And the leader of one of these kind of new churches was passing by, and he saw a fellow Christian in need, so he thought he'd stop and give him a hand. And as he approached, he saw the bishop take off the petrol cap and then pour the contents of the potty into his car, and he was absolutely gobsmacked. He said, "If I'd known they had such faith in the Anglican Church, I would never have left it." Great faith, great faith. Now, we used to hear references to faith all over the place, in sermons and hymns, and of course reading about it more often in the Bible. But the question is, and I want to ask this afternoon, is what is faith? You know, there's lots of definitions over the years. You may well have heard this one, which is based on the word faith, F-A-I-T-H, which stands for forsaking all, I take him. Him being, of course, Jesus Christ. So that's one definition of faith. Forsaking all, I take him. Or what about this one from Martin Luther King? He said, faith is taking the first step even when you can't see the whole staircase. Which I thought was another interesting one. And of course, the Bible has its own definitions. You probably know the one from the letter to the Hebrews, where it says that faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. But the Bible isn't that bothered about definitions. What it tends to show us is faith in action. It gives us stories or examples rather than definitions. And one great example is the reading from Matthew's Gospel today. Jesus, at the end of this episode, says to the woman, "Woman, you have great faith." So, obviously, the story leading up to that is one about faith. What made her faith great that he should take such notice and praise her? Well, the first thing to say about it, looking at the gospel account here, is that faith is based on revelation. You can't have faith in something that's not been revealed to you. God reveals himself to us, and then we are given the option to have faith in him or not. So when Jesus asked the disciples, who did people say that he was? After hearing the various answers, he says to them, what about you? Who do you think I am? And Simon, as he often does, blurts out, you are the Christ, the Son of God. Now, where on earth did he get that from? He hadn't worked it out himself. It wasn't just a lucky guess. God, in that moment, revealed to him that the person in front of him was his own Son, the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And the same thing happens here. The Canaanite woman, in a moment of divine insight, says to Jesus, cries out something very similar. She says, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. Lord, most often it's used as a term for God. And Son of David is another way of saying that he is a descendant of David, in particular, one particular one, and that is the Messiah. And so it's on that basis, seeing or being given that insight who Jesus was, that she cries out to him and asks her to have mercy on her child. Because here was one who was uniquely qualified to provide mercy and healing, and that is Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. But faith isn't just about revelation. Faith is also about action. It's about faithfulness. Or in this case, persistence. Holding on to your belief in the one who has been revealed to you. And this is what we see it follows. It's a tremendous story of wonderful persistence. In verse 23, Matthew tells us that as she cries out to him, Jesus, it says, did not answer a word. He almost blanks her out. He appears to completely ignore her appeal. But she carries on crying out. And the disciples get really fed up with this. So they say to Jesus, can't you shut up? Send it away, for crying out loud. All we're hearing is her crying out all the time for mercy. Send it away. And Jesus, in response, appears to reject even further this woman's cries. But he says, look, I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. In other words, his mission was primarily to the Jews. Although we have to ask ourselves, what is he doing in Gentile territory in that case? Anyway, but not to be put off, the woman just keeps on asking for help. And once again, and finally, Jesus seems to put her down altogether. And he says to her, look, it's not right to take the children's bread, the children being the children of Israel, and to feed it to the dogs. Now, that's an insult, isn't it? To call somebody a dog any time is a terrible thing. And in those days, the dog referred to those who are not Jews, to the Romans, the Gentiles, the pagans, and certainly to their age-old enemies, the Canaanites, of whom this woman was one. And so we want to ask ourselves the question here, which I did, is what on earth is Jesus doing? This is so un-Jesus-like. It's so un-Jesus-like. And this is where we must really pause and think a little bit more deeply about what's going on here. The first thing to say is that knowing the Jesus that you and I know from the rest of the Gospels, he was never rude. He was never dismissive of anybody who came to him for help. He never sent them away. He would test them, certainly, but you never, ever sent them away. He's the greatest example of love and compassion that ever lived. So we bear that in mind in what's going on here. And the second thing to say is we need to understand that when we are reading something like this, we're only reading bare words. We're not listening to his tone of voice. We're not reading his body language. So we're only seeing a kind of one-dimensional view of Jesus here. You know, we used to get this, for example, in texts and on our mobile phones. I can't tell you how many times I've offended somebody or been offended because a text that was sent me was meant to be ironic or sarcastic or joking, but when you read the words, you don't see any of that at all. Because it's a text. It can't tell you anymore, it's just words. Now today we have what's called emojis. I have kids, so I know all this language, okay? It's foreign language, emojis. In other words, little faces that smile or make some sort of gesture to show that you don't mean it exactly as it's read. There's a nuance to it. And so the text on its own can be misleading, and it's the same here. I think that Jesus was smiling when he spoke. And, like we call a friend, you old rascal, don't we? We say it in a very kind of loving way. I think he was being playful or tongue-in-cheek here, playing with that word to see what would happen. He was gently testing her faith, drawing it out from her and seeing how far she was willing to go in order to have his help. And I think it's the same with us, sometimes, delayed prayers are delayed for a reason. I think sometimes they're delayed to draw from us a greater sense of faithfulness and urgency. It's about helping us to grow as people, to help us to grow up. And he's doing that by being just a little bit testing here. And the same with prayers. Don't be put off by an answered prayer. In fact, Jesus says, doesn't he, in I think it's Luke 18, about the woman with the judge. She kept coming back to the judge all the time. And Jesus said, this parable was told in order to encourage a persistence in prayer. In other words, I'm going to answer, but just keep going, keep faithful. And what really seals it for me is right at the end. If you're wondering whether we're being a bit fanciful here, when Jesus finally talks to her, he says this, "Woman, you have great faith." Now, we have to be careful with that word woman. Can you remember somebody else that Jesus called woman? The mother, his own mother, in Cana of Galilee. Woman, why bother me now? It's not my hour. The word woman means dear lady. Unless you're having a row with your wife and you say, "Woman, what do you want now?" Which is what happens in our house sometimes. But no, in that day, it meant dear lady. It's a term of great endearment and respect and affection. And he says that this Canaanite woman, he calls her dear lady. And so, playing along with Jesus, she comes back to this, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." Even in that moment, she recognized that he is the master. And she says, even the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table. It's a wonderful moment. So here we find a persistent faith based on a revelation that comes from God. And she doesn't give up at the first hurdle, or the second, or the third. She just keeps on going. And Jesus is amazed at her incredible faithfulness and faith. And thirdly, and lastly, there's this deep humility and reverence. Now, I don't hear those words much nowadays, do we? Let alone see it. Humility and reverence. 2 words. Several times she calls him Lord. And then she humbly kneels at his feet to make her requests. Where, I want to ask, is such humility today? I don't mean just the outward show when we're kneeling to pray or receive communion, or we're bowing at the altar, but I'm talking about the humility that starts from within, the inner reality of humility that comes from the heart. Kneeling is good, bowing is good, but only if the heart kneels and the heart bows at the same time. I always remember the story of a rather active little boy who would not keep still in church. And we've all had them. I've had kids like that, don't you? And he just kept standing on the pew all the time. His mother was absolutely flabbergasted. She was really annoyed by this because she wanted to be engaged in the service. And all he would do is stand up and mess around on the pew. So and finally she had enough of this. And she turned to him and said, if he didn't sit down, there would be big trouble when he got home. And so the little boy sat down, his arms folded, and then turned to his mother and said defiantly, "Okay, but I'm still standing on the inside." He wanted the last word. Yes, I'm sitting down, but I'm not inside. You see, it's that disconnect, isn't it? Between what's within, what's without. How many of us humbly bow and kneel in church, but we're doing the opposite on the inside? You've got to connect the two. The outward one is the expression of the inside one, but so often the outward one can be covering up what is lacking on the inside. True humility is when outward actions are expressions of inner humility and reverence. So here is faith writ large in this wonderful, wonderful lady. We see it in her confession of Jesus, the Son of God and Messiah. Her willingness to persist in her request, not to give her, strong in the belief that here before her was the Messiah, the Son of God, who would answer her fervent prayers. And all this expresses itself in true humility as she kneels before Jesus and waits. But this leaves us with a question. Have we such faith today? Jesus once asked this. He said, when the Son of Man comes again, will he find faith on the earth? Now this year we've been challenged by the Mothers Union leadership to grow our branches by 50%. I have to say to Llyr, my gosh, is that 50%? I mean, that's amazing. But don't think that because they've got more than 50%, everyone else can put our feet up now and think, oh, well, we've achieved it. No, this is for all the branches, not just for the one branch. So well done. But that's the challenge. And given the world that we live in today, it seems impossible. A bit like the situation with a woman with a demon-possessed daughter. But like her, we have Jesus, don't we? He's the same yesterday, which is then, and today, and tomorrow. We have Jesus, the Son of God, the Messiah. And the question is, do we believe? Do we believe that we have free access to Jesus in prayer? Do we believe enough to keep and keep on asking, to seek and keep on seeking, to knock and to keep on knocking? And that's the test, isn't it? Do we have that faith? Not just the faith to believe, but the faith that is faithful and persistent and humble before God. You know, when we're asked to grow our branches, do we have the humility to say to ourselves, I just can't do it. We just can't do it. But I know someone who can. I know someone who can. And he's only a prayer away. The woman could not cast out the demon from her daughter any more than we can physically compel people to join the Mothers Union. Although I hear in Llyr that you have somebody that compels people to come in. Is that right? Rather persuasively. Wonderful. But we can. That's not the usual way to do it. But she was willing to beg and pray and humble herself before Jesus until he gave her the help that she needed. The question I want to leave with you today is, are we willing to do the same? Is our faith such that we will persist? We will stay faithful until he answers. Let me just leave you with this. Another acronym, is it? PUSH. Have you heard of this? PUSH. Pray until something happens. Okay? Whenever you pray, remember that word push. Pray until something happens. Let me just say the S, something. That's God's sphere, that is. Something. Something will happen if you pray until that something happens. May God give you the grace to be faithful. Amen.